Welcome back, folks, to my Season 1 review/retrospective of Spongebob Squarepants. We're talking about Episode 2 today. We've got 2A, which is called Bubble Stand, and 2B, which is called Ripped Pants, or Not to Be. I already recorded this previously, and then I got done, was very satisfied with it, and it turned out that OBS had my mic disabled because I was doing something else and I completely forgot to undisable it. So I'm doing this again. Oh boy. At least I get to correct some of the mistakes I made in that first attempt. But we'll start with 2A, which is Bubble Stand. Basic premise, SpongeBob sets up a bubble stand to allow people to blow bubbles for, I believe it's 5 cents. And Squidward gets annoyed by it, ends up getting roped into it, along with Patrick, and hilarity ensues. Excuse me. So this episode, is very good, but I would say average. It's not bad. It's not like, oh, I want to turn this off. It's very average. Out of the 2 episodes, it's the weaker of the 2, but that by no means it's bad. It's definitely funny. It's got its iconic moments that people quoted from it back in the day. I remember people quoting the whole "it's a giraffe" line from Patrick because it was just funny as he's laughing like a madman. This episode established a whole lot of tropes that we see going forward, such as the dynamic between SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward in their neighborhood. This episode strictly takes place in their neighborhood on Conch Street, and we see basically a deeper characterization of both SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward. We see Patrick finally being established as sort of a lovable goofball moron, whereas in Help Wanted and Tea at the Tree Dome, he was portrayed more as just a lovable friend, a little airheaded, but not really terribly stupid. Maybe a little clueless when it comes to some things, especially at Tea at the Tree Dome, but in this episode, we really see that he is just a lovable dunderhead, and that's how he's portrayed for many seasons going forward, until now, where he's just basically a brain-dead idiot who... I'm not even going to talk about the recent seasons now. I'll have to make another video talking about that, my mixed feelings on recent SpongeBob, because it is a different show for all intents and purposes. Make no mistake about it. They have changed the series. It's nowhere near seasons 1 to 4. It is a completely differently paced and acted series, so we'll talk about that at some other point. But for right now, bringing it back to Bubble Stand. Very well-paced episode. Not very dynamic as far as locations are concerned. Again, it just takes place on Conch Street, but the location is definitely not the draw of this episode so much as what's going on screen with the bubbles and the bubble art and SpongeBob's creativity with bubbles, which is another thing that is early established, is that he's incredibly talented bubble blower, along with being an incredibly talented fry cook, which was established in Help Wanted. We see how Squidward is very easily annoyed with his neighbors and doesn't really like them, but yet is always somewhat curious about what they're doing and ends up getting roped into their situation. And they will repeat that trend throughout multiple episodes. I can think of multiple ones off the top of my head. Can't think of their titles, of course, at the moment, but there's several in seasons going forward where Squidward ends up getting roped into SpongeBob and Patrick's nonsense and ends up getting screwed over at the end. And that's very well established here, because at the end of the episode, his house basically ends up getting destroyed somewhat. So you see a lot of that. That trope in particular of his house getting destroyed gets reused over and over and over. And even into later seasons, it gets more elaborate how his house gets destroyed. It's really funny, but very solid episode, very quotable. Easy to follow. The plot's not too lost in the weeds. The characterizations of SpongeBob and Patrick aren't terribly annoying. They're very balanced. I feel like as later seasons go on, SpongeBob and Patrick's characterization definitely get, toned up to 11, their annoying factor. And I really don't understand the purpose of that, wherein, at least from seasons 1 to 4, they seem more measured and reasonable. And Patrick's lovable idiocy is played off for fun as opposed to just making him look brain dead. So it's very balanced here, and I really like it. But the thing that I'm not a huge fan of with this episode in particular is that it just... I don't know. It's probably because hindsight is 2020. If this episode was very self-contained in a box, then I would say, oh yeah, it's great. It's very unique. But it's not. It establishes a whole lot of tropes that we see going forward, and because of that, it doesn't really stand out to me as something that things never really happen again, because we do see SpongeBob make crazy bubble art again. We do see Squidward getting screwed over by SpongeBob and Patrick's antics. We do see Patrick acting like an idiot in future episodes. There's a whole lot of stuff that we see repeated, and sometimes done better, even in this season. So it doesn't really stand out to me, but it is a solid episode. And if you're watching the show for the first time, do not skip it. And even if you're rewatching it, it still holds up as a solid episode. So I wouldn't skip straight to Ripped Pants just because it feels more like a run-of-the-mill episode. Because at this point, things are just getting established still. So for that, it's fine. It achieves that goal very well. Moving on to episode 2B, which is my favorite of this two-sided episode, which is Ripped Pants. There's a lot of stuff that's established here, but I'll go over the basic premise, which is that SpongeBob and Sandy are hanging out at Goo Lagoon, which is revealed for the first time to be a hangout in Bikini Bottom, a beach basically, or I think it's established to be a beach with a full-on ocean later on, but at first it's just portrayed as sort of a big lake with a beach, which I kind of like better than an actual full-on ocean beach, because I grew up by the ocean. I grew up in southern Rhode Island, so I went to the beaches that were all around there. And anybody who grew up around there noticed, you might have noticed that those beaches weren't like beaches in a lot of other places. They were kind of boring, and there was less to do. There was mostly just sand and water. There weren't a whole lot of attractions along the beach, or at least not ones that were on the sand itself. I never really liked the beach. I was never a fan of the beach growing up. I didn't like going. I went probably a grand total of 4 or 5 times as a kid, to my memory, and that was it. I just never liked it. Also, I lost a toy in the sand, so pretty bitter about that. Even at 30, I still remember it fresh in my mind. I was pretty upset. I really liked that little toy truck, but I should have known better. And it is what it is, I got over it eventually, but I never really liked the beach. Sand just gets everywhere. But the interesting thing about Goo Lagoon is that it looks like a beach that I would hang out in, because they don't do a whole lot with the water. In fact, I don't think they do a whole lot of anything, really. There's just one scene that takes place on the water. But yeah, the basic premise: SpongeBob, Sandy hanging out on the beach. SpongeBob's making some sand sculptures and doing funny impressions of his friends and just random things. And then we get introduced to Larry the Lobster, who shows up and ruins the fun. Interesting thing about this, though, is it's portrayed as though Larry is ruining the fun, but you can tell he has no hostile intentions. When he shows up to SpongeBob and Sandy, he just invites them to do something else. And SpongeBob is disappointed because, he was having fun, and Larry's like, hey, let's go play volleyball. And so SpongeBob ends up trying to serve the ball, ends up ripping his pants, feeling all embarrassed, and then some guy comes along and tells him he's hilarious. And so the rest of the episode, he spends the time trying to creatively rip his pants because it's the funniest thing to him in the world, and ends up taking it too far, doesn't learn his lesson, at the end sings a song where he does learn his lesson, and the episode ends. Now, that doesn't sound terribly compelling the way that I put it, but it's a really, really solid episode, the way that these events take place, and it's very well paced, very well timed, and the moral of being true to yourself is more relevant now than ever in the social media age, where everybody is trying to just be extravagant and showcase the best parts of themselves. It really reminds me that when I'm on social media, my goal is to just share things that I enjoy, and to just be as humble as possible, instead of just bragging about, I have this or I have that, but just talking about I enjoy these aspects. Like, I enjoy gaming, so I share gaming stuff. I enjoy railroads and cartoons, so I share railroads and cartoon stuff. Just fun stuff, because a lot of people spend their time on social media just ranting about things and just being self-absorbed, and I fell into that trap when I was about 16 or so, with early Facebook and Twitter, and to be frank, it's just not a way to do it. I learned very quickly, it just turns you into a bad person, and I don't have any intention of being that, especially at 30. You know, I've matured throughout my 20s. I learned a lot of life lessons about interacting with people on social media and the growing medium that it is, having been on it for so long. And I feel like this episode is a lot ahead of its time as a result of that, because it really portrays a scenario where you've got SpongeBob trying to be extravagant to get Sandy's attention, even though he already had her attention in the beginning by just being himself, but he forgot that lesson as soon as Larry came into the picture, which basically the whole Ripped Pants song at the end describes. And I think it's a great lesson for kids to really just be humble, be themselves, and not worry about what other people think or what other people say, but just don't go out of your way to be extravagant. And I think that that's a timeless lesson. It's a good episode to show kids if they are getting kind of out of control in that regard. It's a good life lesson episode, and SpongeBob doesn't do a whole lot of life lesson episodes. It doesn't do a whole lot of those, and I feel like when it does them very well. And it did this one through song. SpongeBob doesn't do a whole lot of songs. It's done more and more as seasons have gone on. They've done some episodes that are more musical. I'm not a big fan of musical episodes, but the musical number done here is done so incredibly well. It's performed so incredibly well. And the thing that really sells me on this episode, as mundane as it might be to some other people, is how dynamic the location of Goo Lagoon actually is. You know, we see them just on the beach, we see them in a designated volleyball area, there's a big old snack bar, SpongeBob erects a sand coliseum to play music in, complete with sand instruments and a sand blimp somehow. But it's a very dynamic location. There's a lot that can be done there, even with just the sand, and it's really, really cool. And I think that's one thing I'm just now figuring out, is that the whole thing about being true to yourself. SpongeBob was great at sand sculptures. He sculpted this big thing and made a song. You know, he made instruments and sculpted this big coliseum out of sand, and it's just, that's who SpongeBob is, and that's the goal, is that SpongeBob is a great character. He doesn't need to resort to a cheap gimmick just to get people's attention. So that's really neat when you pause and think about it for a minute. It's showcasing, you know, something he was good at the beginning, and then at the very end he goes back to that, essentially, when he builds and erects this coliseum. They don't show how he does it, but that's cartoon shenanery, so it is what it is. But very solid 2 episodes. Like I said, I really think that the standout here is Ripped Pants. It's more iconic for the song at the end. It introduces Larry the Lobster, which is one of my favorite characters of all time. Until recent seasons, he hasn't gotten a whole lot of screen time, but every time he shows up, he's really good. He's voiced by Doug Lawrence, who's one of the writers, and he's also the voice of Plankton. And Fred, the guy who constantly is screaming my leg, which is an established trope in this season. Really, really good voice actor. One of my favorite voice actors, in fact. And Larry is one of his best performances, in my opinion. So, really like the character. I don't know if it's just because his design is so unique and there's not a whole lot of lobsters in the series. I don't think we ever see any other lobsters, to be honest. I know we see a shrimp at one point, but we don't see other crustaceans besides a lobster and a crab, so that's definitely different. But I really do like his characterization here. He's not even really a bully, and he's never established as a bully character. Although he's introduced as sort of being a bully or ruining the fun, he's really not. He's just kind of a cool musclehead lifeguard type. Has good intentions, but might be a little dopey with his overemphasis on weightlifting, and, you know, I don't know. I just like the character. I think he's very simple, but very dynamic, and they flesh him out in later seasons for sure. But I like his introduction here. I think it's really good. I wish he got a little bit more screen time, but they definitely make up for it in the future. So, Sandy's got a good characterization here. She's very grounded. Her responses to SpongeBob are very realistic. SpongeBob is characterized really good here. It shows how he's vulnerable to peer pressure and wanting to conform to peer pressure, and we do see that repeated a lot with his character. And this is another way that this is another good establishing episode for things that we see in the future. Possibly more so than Bubble Stand. Bubble Stand while it establishes the dynamic between the three neighbors, this establishes more of the characterization of SpongeBob himself and of Sandy, who we see infrequently. Really, really good. Really, really good. Very balanced. Kind of brings... The thing I like about Season 1 is how you're slowly seeing Bikini Bottom start to come to life and be this bustling society, and that there are so many layers and aspects to it, even though it's focusing on our central character for most episodes. It's showing that this is a world where you can focus on any given thing, kind of like a Simpsons or something else where there's multiple background characters. You know, it's really cool. You're seeing this world come to life and do it in a big way, but slowly. You're seeing slow reveals of things. You know, each episode, like we got the Krusty Krab and Help Wanted. We got the Tree Dome and Sandy with Tea at the Tree Dome. In Bubble Stand, we got Squidward's house and Squidward's dynamic. And here in Rip Pants, we got Goo Lagoon. We got more of Sandy. We got Larry. And we got the depth of SpongeBob, and even some of the background characters were given a little bit of depth. So, very, very solid. I would recommend both of these episodes highly. Nothing really bad to say other than, and I don't even know if you can call it bad, but with Bubble Stand, it feels very average in retrospect, but it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. I want to emphasize that clearly. It's not bad, it's not boring. It just, once you've seen the rest of the series, you've seen the trope played out, and it's played out so dynamic, where it's played out so basic here between SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward. It's what happens here is so basic and predictable. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I've seen that before. But for its time and being the one that establishes a lot of those tropes, I think it's absolutely worth watching. Even if you've seen it before, I would highly recommend a rewatch. I would for this entire season. This entire season is just golden. It really is great. So, anyways, folks, that is going to do it for me. Thank you very much for watching this Season 1 review / retrospective of SpongeBob SquarePants, episodes 2A and 2B, or not 2B, and I will see you guys when we do episode 3. So, again, thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.